In this video, I'll document changing the gear oil in my 95 two-wheel drive 2.4L Nissan Hardbody. I started at my local auto parts store, which was my first mistake, wish I hadn't done that. Their system, for whatever reason, told them my truck needed their Fram GL5 gear oil. I'll split this video up into 3 sections, with the first being how to find what type of gear oil is required. This is specific to my 95 Nissan, but will act as a good reference for all. I suggest to start off by reviewing the Door Jam Vehicle Data Label, which is a sticker with information about your vehicle. The information we're looking for is which transmission is included in our truck. Now that we have that, we can reference the factory service manual to find our transmission and identify what kind and how much gear oil is required. One thing I'll mention real quick is that there is a TSB or technical service bulletin for the four-wheel drives that calls for you to overfill the transmission compared to what's in the service manual. But since I have the two-wheel drive, I'm not going to worry about that. I will leave a link in the description containing most of the Nissan Hardbody service manuals. Not all years are included, but the ones listed will cover all the different variations. From the maintenance section in our manual, we can see that our transmission requires 4¼ pints of the APL GL4 gear oil. There seems to be a debate out there on GL4 versus GL5 gear oils, and I won't pretend to be an expert. The attached essay goes into much detail, and I'll include a link in the description so you can read through it if interested. The gist is, GL5 has additional additives that can damage brass components of older engines. Since the hard bodies do have brass components, it's best to use GL4 as the service manual indicates. Better safe than sorry. A highly suggested GL4 gear oil is the MT-90 Redline. It's about 3 times as much as the Fram that AutoZone sold me, but the GL4 will keep the brass in your transmission safe. None of the local auto parts stores carried this brand, nor any other GL4. All they had was GL5. But I did find a good price on the MT-90 on Amazon, and I will include a link in the description. Next, we'll talk about pumps, because this process is working against gravity. You have to fill the transmission with gear oil through the fill plug. Advanced Auto suggested this one to me, which was a horrible suggestion. Not only is it messy, but the tube wasn't long enough and it'd take about 40 minutes of pumping to get the 4¼ pints in. I ended up taking that one back and getting this one, which was 100 times faster, but just as messy. Out of the available options at Advanced Auto, I think this one would have worked better, or at least been less messy. But honestly, I think the best bet is to get a long hose and a funnel and go through the engine bay. I think that would be the easiest and cleanest way to complete this task. Next, we'll go over actually changing the gear oil. In my 95 Hardbody, the factory service manual calls for 4¼ pints of the GL4. As mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Advanced Auto told me their Fram GL5 is what my truck needed. Changing the gear oil was not the main focus that day, as we were also working on the ball joints and the front shocks, so I hadn't really done my research, and Advanced Auto seemed very confident in what they were suggesting. When you're draining the gear oil, it's always a good idea to start with the fill plug. The thought behind that is, if you can't get the fill plug off or you damage it, at least you haven't drained the fluid yet and can still drive the vehicle. But since this is not my main vehicle, it really didn't matter, and we started with the drain plug. To remove the drain plug, we used a breaker bar with a 1/2-inch drive. The plugs were extremely tight, so to help, we used a pipe as a cheater bar. Gave us a little extra leverage. It's been at least 10 years since this oil's been changed, so I'm curious to see what it looks like. One of the main reasons I'm changing the gear oil is there are signs underneath the vehicle of a leak near the gearbox, so I want to check it to see how much oil is in there. And as you can tell right now, it's not in bad condition. We do have the vehicle jacked up in the front, so some of the oil has shifted to the back side of the transmission, but even with that, there doesn't appear to be enough oil in there. Running it low on gear oil for an extended period of time may be the cause of the metal shavings that we're finding on the drain plug magnet here.
Might be a magnet on there.
Yeah.
That's just wear and tear.
We let this drain out while we did the ball joints and the shocks, but one thing we didn't do was level the truck so we could finish draining the oil. I'm not sure why we didn't do that, because if it's jacked up, there's going to be some left in the transmission, but we didn't even think of that. But while we're here, let's see how low we actually were. To discard the used oil, I poured that into the same jug, which still had some new stuff in it. I know, wasteful. It still had about 1.5 quarts, which is 3 pints. After we finished pouring in the old, it got up to about the 3-liter line, as you'll be able to see here in a second, which is about 6.3 pints. Based on that, I estimate we drained out about 3.3 pints. With what was left in the back of the transmission, we may have been a full pint low from the required 4¼ pints. Now it's time to put the oil into the transmission. We started off with the white pump that Advanced Auto suggested. This may have been okay if you're working from quart jugs, and especially okay if you're just trying to top off or something, but it ended up being a slow, miserable mess. About 5 minutes in, we broke the pump, so we had to take it back and get a different one.
Before I start pumping, squirting in my head.
Besides it breaking, a few of my beefs with this pump is that the hose isn't long enough. It easily pops out as you're trying to hold up the jug and pump at the same time, and really it requires two hands, which is, especially if you're doing it by yourself, is almost impossible. And we had two people here, but the hose is so short you really couldn't use two people to get the job done. So after we messed around with it, like I said, for 5 minutes, I mean, we were barely down. I mean, we didn't even have a quarter of a pint in. It was just kind of ridiculous. Kind of glad the thing broke so we could just take it back and get a new one. And this is the one I exchanged it for, and it was 100 times faster, but probably just as messy, if not messier. Now, I didn't get any footage of us putting it in with the new pump. We made it happen, but it was extremely messy. Thankfully, I saved the pump because after driving the truck the next day, the good people on the infamous Nissan forums told me about the GL5 versus GL4 issue, so now I'm doing it all over again. Tried to do it by myself, and embarrassingly, I did everything I could to try to break these plugs, but I eventually had to call in the reinforcements. I realized my downfall was not jacking it up to give myself enough of an angle to use the breaker bar properly.
We're gonna put
So apparently the trick is using your entire body to push off against the truck frame and putting your life in the hands of a 20-year-old jack. Duly noted. So we let it drain while it was jacked up again, but this time I let it down to finish. When I first dropped the jack, there was a surge of oil that came out, then it slowly drained like this for 5 minutes or so. So this is a necessary step to make sure it drains properly. Now, with my MT-90 in tow from Amazon, I was ready to fill her back up. I thought I'd try the spray pump method of getting the oil into the transmission. I saw someone on YouTube do this and it was quick, easy, and mess-free. That all sounded good after messing with that other pump, but unfortunately the gear oil is too thick and it just trickles out even with full pressure. Since I already had the oil in the pump sprayer, I thought, nah, I'll give it a try, even though I know it's going to be coming out very slow. I was able to prop it up so it'd flow out without me having to press the trigger, but after about 5 minutes, the oil level barely moved, and this is how slow it was coming out. So I went ahead and abandoned this and got out the old messy pump. I fought with this for a good 10 minutes. The main issue I was having was the hose wanted to curl up inside the pump sprayer to the point where the opening wasn't in the oil. So as I'd pump, I'd just get air. I switched the hoses around a few times before I even figured this out, but then I was able to rig up something to keep the hose in the bottom of the sprayer and then finally got it done. But again, this footage is not great. Just know that it is in there and we got her done. The way you know you have enough oil in the transmission is when it starts to trickle out like this. Basically, it's a fill to spill setup. Once that happened, I lowered the jack so that it would spill out while the truck was level. Once it started dripping at this speed, I jacked the truck back up, put in the fill plug, and called it a day. If you hung around this far, I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.